Our next speaker comes from Sweden. Peter Korn is a plantsman, gardener, and designer at Klinta Trädgård. Driven by a desire to understand how plants grow in their natural environments, he has traveled extensively and has translated his plant knowledge into creating gardens that give plants what they want without resorting to irrigation or heavy maintenance. He will share some of that knowledge and experience with us now in his lecture on designing for plants. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be invited here. I started growing plants about 25 years ago. I didn't know much about plants. I did a lot of fishing and aquariums before, and I just bought a house and there was a garden. And my father's wife, she had a lot of horses. So I had an unlimited number of horse manure to use. So the first year I planted everything in horse manure. Sempervivums, cacti, rhododendrons, everything. Everything grew really fast and everything died in the winter. But I had been traveling a lot in the northern Sweden, fly fishing in the north, walking in the mountains. And I've seen a lot of alpines growing in the wild. So quite quickly I realized alpines don't grow in horse manure, and I have to create something as they grow in the wild. So that was my start, trying to figure out how the plants grow in the wild and then grow the plants the same way. I had a garden in the south first for 7 years, where I started with horse manure and went over to sand. And then I moved to a garden, or to a forest outside of Gothenburg. So it's on the west coast of Sweden. It's very cold and wet. I didn't know how bad it was when I moved there, but I realized this is the coldest, wettest spot in southern Sweden. If you look on the weather map, there is a purple spot where my garden is. So the rainfall is about 1,400 millimeters a normal year, 2 meters a wet year. It goes down to minus 30 in the winter, and that's okay, but then you have minus 6 in June sometimes, and that's really bad. So drainage is the main issue. It has to be well drained. And the problem, if I liked alpine plants and cold, wet areas, this would be a perfect spot. But I like the desert and steppe and hot, dry places. So building a garden, it was 5-acre spruce forest when I started. So I really had to rebuild the whole landscape, as Keith is doing, to create all these different habitats to be able to grow all kinds of plants. So this is what the plants I started with, all these tiny cushions from Spain and to Turkey and Iran, places that are not similar to Sweden at all. So to be able to grow them, I need to create really bad conditions. I would love to have a climate like Philippi. That's the perfect. So creating conditions that is similar to Philippi's in the forest of Sweden, that was the goal, to be able to grow all these amazing cushions. And I also had a nursery to supply myself, mainly, and to make... and I had to sell a few plants to pay the bills, but mainly I propagated all the plants I needed myself, and then I sold the surplus. And quite often I needed all myself. And it was a lot of alpines. I went to all the good nurseries in England and Scotland and bought one of each, and then I went home propagating them. So I could buy one, and then I sold one, and then all the rest was for free. So I was growing thousands of different species. Another good source was my brother. He was out cycling for 10 years in Central Asia. And he's a botanist, so he sent me a seed package all the way. So every month there was a box with seeds from all over Central Asia. So a lot of the strange plant I grow is from his collections. So half the garden is like naturalistic. I'm creating landscapes that look similar to the places I've been in the wild. and big drifts of flowers, and thousands of species. I can't reduce myself to 5, even if I know that would be much easier to maintain. I'd rather have 500 in a bed. It makes it much more interesting. And the other part of the garden is more ornamental. There's a lawn, some more groups, but also a lot of plants mingling in between. The garden is 5 acres, and I do all the maintenance myself. So the maintenance is the key. I don't have time for good soil. It just takes too much time. You have to add compost, and you have to weed it and water it. And so the sand beds are so much easier. So in my garden, all the beds are just pure sand. No compost, no watering, no fertilizing. I just make a sand bed that is about 20 to 30 centimeters thick. The sand I'm using is very coarse, from 0 to 8 millimeters or coarser. A very easy test. You should not be able to make a cake of it. If you can make a cake, it's too fine and there is too much clay in it, and it will dry out in the summer and keeps the moisture in the winter. So the cake test is the easiest. And then I just put the sand on top of the soil or on the cliff, or doesn't matter what's under it, as long as it's something poor. And I had the luxury of having poisonous soil in the garden. The pH is so low, so the aluminium release, and aluminium is poisonous for almost all plants. So nothing grows down in the soil below. So I can keep it really poor. They don't find any nutrients below. So all the roots just stay in the sand. There's nothing to pick up. When you have a dandelion germinating in the sand, when the roots go down to the original soil, the root turns black and grows sideways. So there's not even the oaks go down in the soil below. So everything is just laying on the surface. If I had a fertile soil, I wouldn't learn that much. Then everything would be much easier. So now I have a horrible climate with a lot of rain, cold winters and summers, and poisonous soil. So that's a very good way to learn how to grow plants. So normally I plant the plants, and I always bare root them. I take away all the soil. I wash the roots to get rid of all the organic matter. Then I plant them in the sand. I water them once, really drown them. So it should be so much water so the sand gets almost floating, so all the air pockets disappear. Sometimes I fertilize them a little bit when I plant them, and then normally never again. The problem with the sand is very slow. The first year, the plants are just sitting there and doing nothing. The second year, they start to grow, and the third year, they are really growing. So it's a very slow process, but it also means that it lasts for many years. The oldest beds are 15 years now, and it's still growing strong in them without any fertilizing for 15 years. And in the sand, you get a lot of mycorrhiza. I wish Filippi was talking more about that, but someone else should. The mycorrhiza helps the plants to pick up the nutrients, and mycorrhiza gets what it needs back. So the beds are self-fertilizing. And because the surface of the sand dries up so quick, so there is very few weeds can establish in the sand. And if you get any weeds, it's so easy to pull them up. So this is really low maintenance and long-lasting plantings. And if you want to read more about it, you can buy my book. So I have some copies with me. So if you go there after my talk, there's a few. So it's about how the plants grow in the wild and how you can use that in the garden. I've also been working at the botanical garden in Gothenburg. I was working there on and off for 10 years. When they needed someone that was good at digging, they phoned me. So I did the basic work, and then they did the plantings. This is the bulb garden, where they grow bulbs from dry steppe areas all over the world. And the purpose of the roofs is not to protect them in the winter. It's to protect them from the summer rain, because the climate in Sweden is so wet in the summer. So all these plants, they need a hot, dry summer. So this summer, they wouldn't need a roof, because it was a really good summer this year, the best ever. I hope we will have summers like this every year. I think I was the only one in Sweden who didn't complain of the nice summer. So this plant, they come from all over the world, from these dry steppe regions where there is always hot, dry summers. But in the nature, there is also thousands of different perennials growing with them, and they also like these conditions in the summer. So this is what I'm trying to create in all my beds, the really dry summers, perfect drainage. So I want it to be as dry as possible. It's perfect when it's not raining for 3 months. The kind of plants I want to grow, they like that. And then going out to the wild, seeing plants where they grow. That's my best way of learning, understanding plants, really seeing them growing in the wild, and then try to learn something about that. The problem when you go to the wild is you see the plants for like 1 hour, 1 day of the year. You don't know what happened the next week. If it's a rainy day, you think this plant is growing in a wet climate, but if it's a sunny day, you think it's growing in a sunny condition. So you have to think more than just what you see. So this could have been a really beautiful planting by Filippi, and I really love this kind of climate and kind of plants. And this is quite a lot of the plants I was trying to sell in my nursery, and my customers, they don't buy these kind of plants. So now we have the luxury of having a nursery without customers, and we are using... So we still have a big nursery, but we are using all the plants ourselves, and now I can use all these good plants that people don't want to buy. So now we just have to train people how to like them. But when you show a picture like this, everyone wants to have this in the garden, or at least a version of it. Coming to Kyrgyzstan and seeing these 10,000s of Eromurus, it was just this magic evening. And this is what I want to have in the garden, and that, and like everything. That's my problem, I want all of it, and there's always a limited space in the garden. But trying to copy this in some way and making it into a garden, getting the same feeling. What is really lush meadows, this is old apple forest. It was grazed before with really beautiful meadows, and then it turned into a nature reserve. And now it's just these 2-meter weeds, really beautiful. But it will just take a few more years, and then the walnut trees will just take over, and it will become a forest again. So by protecting it, they destroy it, as we have done everywhere in Europe. But this is good plants for fertile soil. So if you have a good soil in your garden, this is places I will look for plants. And the Pontic Alps in Turkey, they also have a very similar climate to Sweden. So all the plants from Caucasus and Western America, Central Asia, they normally do quite well in my garden. Here's the variation in a meadow. So I'm doing a lot of plants from seed to get this variation, because if you only buy one clone, everything is the same yellow, the same height. So if I have to buy plants, I normally buy a few different varieties of the same to get the variation, or I do them from seed to get like everything from white to dark yellow to make it more like nature. And the steeper meadows, I just love them. And in the wild, it's always up on the hills. It's never in the ditches or in flat areas. The steepers always dominates on the windy crest. And that's the same way I grow them in the garden, just on the most exposed places where it's always windy. Or these areas with really small vegetation. A lot of this looks like Wiley's pictures with these low mats of plant with a few coming up. So perfect to mix them with sedums and thymes and low perennials. And then you get to the desert in America, where it's even better climate. Really hot, dry summers. A lot of salt in the soil. So in the ditches, the salt is collecting. So a lot of this plant is perfect for roadsides and really roundabouts and really difficult places. Mono Lake, the salt lake in California, where the water is full of arsenic and other nice poisonous things. And beautiful plants, but again, maybe a little too gray for English people or Swedish. So you need to add some flowers to it. But you can use this as a base and then adding things to it. And I wish I had a climate for these kind of plants. But we have a big greenhouse, so at least one part of it will be a small desert garden. Because many of them can take frost, as long as not too much. And I really need a long, hot summer. So all of this I want to squeeze into the garden, and I want to grow all of them. So then you have to create, like Keith, you have to create all these different habitats to be able to do it. And some plants are easy to understand. This grows on a mountaintop in a crevice, so it's quite obviously what it wants in the garden too. Just put it in a crack between big stones, very exposed, and then they're quite easy to grow. So rock garden plants, it's just building a rock garden and you can grow them. Understanding a meadow is much more difficult. It's just not 2 of each on every square meter. There is a pattern, and if you do like James and sowing the meadows, this will happen automatically. The plants will establish where the competition is right, and they will move around until they stay there. But if you want to plant them and get this pattern, you really have to know your plants and put them together so they don't outcompete each other. So doing meadows is the most difficult thing, because the plants just want to kill each other and take the space. I didn't have any plans to get insects in the garden to start with. That's what I wanted to grow plants, and I had to create all these different conditions. But when the years went, there's just more and more insects coming into the garden, because there's all the different habitats for insects too. And now there is an ecologist who have started to check the insects in my garden, and he finds almost as many as in the nature reserves in Sweden. So you can really create something for insects. The maintenance here is burning, so they burn it in the spring. And if they want to make a new area for some plants, they put sand beds in the nature reserve, exactly as I do in the garden. So I do the same thing, but yeah, and get the same effect. And in the garden, this is a good year in a Swedish meadow. We don't have that rich meadows. This year it's brown. There is almost not a single flower. So in a garden, you want like a better version of the wild meadows. So this is one of my meadows. It's almost 15 years old now. There's a lot of annuals sitting around, but there is also perennials coming afterwards. Because the Swedish meadows, in the end of June, they are over, and then they are brown. And I want the whole season in the garden. It should be in flower like every day. And in June, it's just thousands of insects here. It's just like an engine, the whole garden. And then in the late summer, this is the same bed, and all the annuals went dormant, and then you have all these late perennials, and then you have the grasses in the autumn and the winter, and then it starts with bulbs all in the spring. So the same bed can have a lot of different function depending on the season. And this don't come of themselves. As I said, it was a spruce forest to start with, 80-year-old trees. So I had to take them all down, dig up all the roots, and then shaping all these different conditions. So I was digging there for 12 years. This bed took me 4 years to build, because I wanted this really exposed south-facing slope to be able to grow plants from Turkey and Iran and the really dry steppe areas. And I tried to make it look as it had been there, so moving around all the stone, placing them where I want. I had to take away up to 3 meter soil to get it down to the bedrock. So only this part of the rock was visible when I started. And then I had done a few beds already and used the stones that was there, but just with that little amount of soil that was on the stone, really destroyed the bed and made the soil poisonous. So I had to wash every stone before I put them back. So I was sitting there in the pond washing stones for weeks. But then I could grow these tiny alpines from Iran. So the biggest bed in the garden is for the tiniest plants. So 4 years later, I was really lucky. There is a pond in the bottom, and I made the water go all the way in. And here is a spring, so the water comes out all the time. There is always water standing. And that's another thing when you dig it by hand. You know every single square centimeter of the garden. You know exactly where there is a spring coming out, where there is a big stone under the soil. And so all these tiny details is very important when you want to grow these difficult alpines. And here on the north side, I can grow the high altitude primulars from the Himalayas. Here I have a cacti from California. Just in a few meters distance, there is all these microclimates. So trying to make a version of the wild, planting all the crucial plants out on the crest, so you get as much wind as possible, dry up really quick. The more meadow plants on the flat areas, very thin substrate on the cliffs for sedums and sempervivums, and plant that grows on cliff in the wild. And the steppe area, a lot of bulbs in the spring. Then you have this lush green, April, May. And then in the summer, the main peak is in June, July. But then I'm adding plants from America to get late season. So it's never just one area. I mix the whole world. If it's a dry meadow, I take some Swedish, some Asian, some Americans to get the whole season. Because every region has their peak of flowering. So if I mix them all, then I get a much longer flower season. And the steepas up on the hills, where the most windy conditions. I could do a garden just with steepas. They are so beautiful. And to be able to grow the cacti, you need to create really hot conditions. So I made this, the cliff wall was there, luckily. So in front of it, it's south-facing, so it gets really warm here. But the wind cools the bed in the summer, so I had to build this hill in front of it, so the wind goes over the bed. So this is just an air pocket, so it gets really warm in the summer. It can be above 50 degrees in the shade there. So this is really good for cacti and agaves and plant that really needs summer heat. So I can actually grow them. They don't thrive that well, but they survive. They do much better in our new garden. So all this knowledge from the wild and the things I've been experimenting with in my garden, I use that now for landscaping. So I closed down my nursery, but then we grow all the plants ourselves for our landscaping projects. So I'm doing roof gardens, green walls, rain gardens, especially all these places that other people think is difficult. I love them. So if they phone me, we can't grow anything here, can you do something? Then I always take it. So the challenge is always there. And before I was very gray in my plantings, but James has learned me it's colorful. If you want to do it for the public, it has to be colorful. And I trust him now. I did this. This is in a park in Stockholm where we planted 300,000 bulbs last year. And I was standing there in the spring and watching people walking there, and everybody stops. Children, young, old, all kind of people. They just stopped there with their phones and took a picture. And he put his dog inside tulips to take a picture of the dog. And so it really works. And I don't use tulips as annuals. I try to use varieties that come back for many years. So this is a dry park. They made a park in an old sand quarry. So it's perfect for tulips that need summer drought. And other parts of the park is a little better soil. So then I'm using the more woodland species. So just choosing the conditions for the bulbs too. And it's a very cheap way to get a really big effect. So I'm using all these cheapest ones from Holland. Yes, thousands of each. And then to Klinta. This is our new garden. I and Julia, we bought it 3 years ago. It was an old vegetable nursery. And there was like no plan of the garden. It was things everywhere. So we are rebuilding it totally. The climate here is opposite to Eskilsby. This is really dry. There's a ridge north of us, so all the clouds that come in from the west, they just follow the ridge. So normally we always have blue sky and then it's raining around us, the opposite to Eskilsby. Where I'm in the rain and I can see the blue sky. So the climate here is really good, much milder in the winter. The coldest we have had the last 3 winters is -13, so this is almost tropical. If I compare it with my other garden, when I can have that in May. Perfect climate for bulbs. They get the summer drought. When we moved in, Julia, she is like we like the same things, but she likes the clay in the south of Sweden. It's good soil, compost, clay soil, wet, the opposite to what I prefer. And the garden is perfect for that, because this is the old beach to a lake that's just close here. So when we dig down here, it's sandy soil, or just pure sand, half-meter down. On the other side of the greenhouse is clay. So I can do what I want in this part, and Julia do what she wants in the other part, and then we do the middle together. And I think both of us, when I went to the Great Trädgård the first time, that really changed my mind of how to grow plants. Before that, I was steppe. But when I saw what I did at Trädgård with all these colorful plantings, then I really started to use colors in my plantings too. And Julia changed her mind too when she went there. So Great Trädgård is the model, not the model, the inspiration for our garden. So this will be hedges and not at all as my old garden. So I will just show pictures from this small area. This is the windiest part of the garden. There's a wind power station just outside of the garden, so it's very windy. When we moved in, there was 3 or 4 rows of hedges to stop the wind. So the first thing I did was to take away all the hedges to make it as windy as possible. So there is a wind tunnel going through my area, so it's like always windy. It's perfect for the steppe plants, because moisture is the biggest problem. So Julia is a garden designer and a teacher at the university. So we are doing the garden together and some of the landscaping. Kendrick Lake Park in Denver, overall, Denver Botanical Garden is also a place you have to go to, because they also use this hot, dry climate to grow an amazing range of plants. So that's also a very good inspiration place. So this is much more organized than I normally do. I'm still trying to create all these different habitats, all the microclimate, but in a more framed way. Making nice pathways, nice edges. And it's not as dramatic as my old garden. But still I can get all these different microclimates. So the bed is designed so I can be able to grow all kinds of plants. So here this part is very exposed to the wind because it comes in from the west normally. So this area here I can grow rock garden plants. And then it's sloping a little bit to the north. to get more into the step plants. This area is a little protected by the trees, so a little bigger perennials. And then you have the wind going through the bed, through the area. So you have this dry, getting really burnt in the winter. This bed is a little raised up, this bed is flat. So all these different, just small variations in the beds, but also makes it totally different what I want to grow in them, or I can grow in them. So the same area in the summer. And in our climate, where it's so far away from where the plants grow in the wild, it's much more necessary to plant the plant in the right spot. In a good climate, you can do almost what you want, but if the climate is really bad, you have to find the perfect spot for the plant. All the beds are made up by the soil that was there. So in this part, I take away the top layer of the good soil and bring that to Julia's side. And then I take the sandy soil and mix it with sand, and then I cover it with 10 centimeter sand. But this bed is sandy soil in the bottom and 20 centimeter sand on top. And no watering, not even this year. This bed will be a little more lush, a little more prairie plants. So this is sloping to the north, a little better soil. So here I just took the lawn and cultivated it, and we'll mix it with sand to get the better drainage, and then cover it with sand. And you get the wind tunnel through here to the rock garden area. And when I dig down here, this is just pure sand in the bottom, so it's good drainage and always windy. So this bed takes the worst wind, or the best wind. So all these gray plants that can take the drought. This year we had a lot of days above 30 degrees, so it was a really hot summer. I spent the day in the sun, like every day. Julia was hiding in the shade, and I was thriving in the sun. And it starts down in the south. It really starts. The first bulb starts in December, and the last one finishes in January. So there's always something in flower. But from February, it really starts flowering. And I love the crocus ansurensis. It's just this bright orange. So every time you look out, it just make you happy. So I need thousands of them just to make the garden orange in the spring. And then I'm mixing things into them. So after the crocus, I get all the tulips. And this is a perfect step climate. So they do very well, and they multiply, come back every year. And I like all of them. Yeah, it's really difficult with the catalog. There's just so many markings. It's so easy when you order them, and then you get the palette, and you have to find somewhere to put them. And I tell Julia, this is for customers. And then, no, I think I need them myself. Yeah, and our winters are far too long, so when the spring arrives, I just need color to wake up again after the long, depressing gray winter. I don't think you can get enough color in the spring. You can just add as much as possible, and then it calms down in the summer. But the spring, you need to be colorful. And I think most people just love a lot of colors in the spring. And they even like yellow in the spring. And all these horrible ones. I have them in one area. It's difficult to mix them with the others. But you can't resist them when you see pictures of them. Some of them is a little too much, but I think I might find a spot for them too. We don't have visitors, so no one knows that I'm growing them. And then after the tulips, you get the alliums, aramurus. So the bulbs can really just keep on the whole season. It's a very good way to get a big effect early in the spring. And when you grow them in really poor conditions, they really look like they do in the wild. They get these wavy leaves and stay really compact. And the leaves also, a lot of the tulips, the leaves just stays on the ground. So when they go dormant, you don't get these big leaves that turn yellow. And so they just stay on the ground, and then other plants cover them. So Vivedensky, I think, is one of my favorites for a more naturalistic planting. They extremely big flowers and really bright red. So perfect to mix in a step bed. And I have really difficulties keeping the numbers low when I do plantings. When I do it for myself, it's at least 30 or 40 species per square meter, maybe 400 in a bed, maybe 1,000 sometimes. But as long as you keep to the same kind of plants, you can't see that there is 400 in that picture. But when the iris start to flower, there's maybe 100 different irises in this bed. And they flower little different times, so there's always irises in flower. But they all look the same. They have the same green color, same gray, so it don't look messy when you choose plant that grows in similar conditions in the wild. But if you start to add woodland plants or soft green plants into it, they crash with the gray. The same bed in the summer. So the season in Sweden is far too short to have a bad day. So you really need flowers all the time. So from February to November, it should be in full flower. It was difficult this year because the summer was, because of the heat, everything was flowering too early. So everything was almost over in August. So the whole feeling of the garden is, I want to have a meadow. So when you just look at it, it's this nice meadow with different patterns. But then when you dive into it, you're finding all the details. But it's all like it's one big planting. And to be able to grow a lot of Philippi's plants and this more tricky desert plant that don't like the climate in Sweden, I have to create this microclimate. And we also want to collect the water from the house. So we did from the roof. So this is a rain garden. Every time it rains, all the water from the house comes out and fills up. So this bed is just 50 centimeters of grit, nothing else, planted last year. And then there's a stone wall around it. So this is south-facing. It's really warm in the summer. So here I can grow all these tricky plants that I can't grow anywhere else in the garden. And it's really the microclimate. And it seems nerdy to think about this, but it's really important. If you know that the plant do best in exactly that position, you can also know how to use it in other positions. So if you know the plants in this detail, you can really start using them. So it feels nerdy, but it's really important. So the Iris Germanica, it needs a lot of heat in Sweden to produce flowers. If I put it further into the bed, it don't get enough heat and it don't flowers, I only get leaves. Out here it might be too dry, so it goes dormant too early and then it don't produce flowers either. So about 20, 30 centimeters into the bed, that's like the perfect spot for it. And then I can vary it, but that's where it grows best. The geranium, it don't like too much competition. So here it stays nice and compact. It flowers a long time of the summer. Good drainage in the winter, but you don't need perfect drainage, so this is a good spot for it. The salvia is tender. I have to put it really close to the stones there or plant it under the stones to make it survive the winter. If I put it 10 centimeters out, it will freeze. And it's quite late, it freezes down to the ground in Sweden, but it comes back from the roots. The Litodora is evergreen. So if I plant that too close to the stones, it gets too hot in the winter, and it might wake up too early, and it gets frosted by late frost. It's also too hot in the summer. So that's the perfect spot for that. The Opuntia, I just want it as hot as possible and dry as possible. Delosperma don't like growing on the flat, because then they rotten in the winter, so they have to hang over something. Same with the Rudium. I need to grow them vertical to make them long-lived. If I put them in a flat bed, I will die. So all these details is so important to know about plants. It doesn't matter if it's a meadow plant or a rock garden plant. If you know exactly what they need, you can use them a lot more. So you can make a cacti garden even in Sweden. Perfect for public places with a lot of children. They don't. They work very well. We have twins, and we tell them don't touch the cacti, and it takes like 2 seconds and scream. But they learn really quick. I love the catalog of Plant Delight. He had a really horrible agave with really long spines. And the text in the catalog was, if you believe in Darwin, plant this at the kindergarten. So, cacti is really good for children. So around the rain garden, this can collect quite a lot of cubic meters of water. And then there you have the south side, you have the east side, the west side, north side. So I'm creating all this microclimate to be able to grow like everything I want. This side is in the same level as the lawn, so these don't dry up that much. That bed is raised up 10, 15 centimeter. This is sloping a little bit to the north to vary it a little bit. So on this side is like drought-tolerant perennials, but they don't need perfect drainage. Gypsophila on the edge, like hanging over. On the north side, I can grow alpines. It's a lot of saxifrages and other things that don't need it too hot in the summer. So in the spring, they get a lot of sun, but then in the summer, the vegetation grows up and they get shaded, so they don't heat up too much. The heucheras do perfectly on the north side in the cracks. And the bed above the rain garden is raised up a little bit, so you get quite dry in the summer. And yeah, I always squeeze in as many plants as possible. And the Gypsophila is a perfect plant for bulbs, because in the spring I have just too many bulbs, and then in June they all start to go dormant and they don't look that interesting anymore. And then the Gypsophila just comes up and just cover them all with this pink fluffy carpet, and you have all the bulbs going dormant under it. And it's airy enough to let the light through it, so the bulbs heat up under it. But it just covers everything, all of the yellow. And then on the north side of the bed, where it don't dry up that much, it's more big perennials. But all of them is very airy, and they don't take up too much space, especially on the ground. So even if it's a 2-meter tall perennial, it's not allowed to take up too much space of the garden. So in the spring, you can see all the tulips is on the south side, so they get the summer dormancy. Narcissus on the north side, or more in the shaded areas. I really try to find the perfect spot for every plant. And in the summer, this whole area was, we started to plant it 2 years ago. Before that, it was just a lawn. So that's the good thing with the good soil. It grows really quick, but already after 2 years, some plants are just taking over. Like the echinopes, we have to reduce them, take them away, because otherwise they will take over the whole garden. So by using a fertile soil, you're adding problem. Some plants grow too much, and yeah, you have to reduce them. But Nigel Dunnard said something very good. It's much better with plants that you have to reduce than replace. So I'm using more reliable plants, and then I take them away if they are too vigorous. So there is this whole, when you just look out over it, it's this big meadow, but there's also details. Some beds just have a few species. So you can get into details when you walk around there. So it's like walking in a meadow and you find this gravel area or a small cliff with other plants. So you can really walk around and explore the garden. There's always something new to see. And I think this is the best thing with gardening, that you can create something like this by knowing your plants, what you can combine and create all these different conditions. And when I walk here in the evenings, I can almost get the same feeling as the Aramurus meadow in Kyrgyzstan. Just this, I just love plants. That was my last picture. So, thank you very much.